had this very militant Black Power mindset, but I had no real knowledge and understanding of how deep racism, imperialism, colonialism, all the isms are all interconnected. Mm-hmm. And very much present. And very much so present. Well, I always knew racism was a thing.
Right. See, that's what I'm saying. So that's why, like, when people talk about like, oh, like this is a soft launch or this is like, it's like, yo, it's been soft launch for generations, and they just normalized it.
Black people are always the experiment. They're gonna slowly do everything to us and then spread it out over everybody else, or not even just Black people, but
and that's why
you're like disenfranchised because you mentioned Appalachia.
Yeah, like Appalachia.
They killed them. America, they're the coal miner.
Yeah, rural America, the reservations with indigenous people, like, and my whole thing is like, if we haven't figured out how to solve the problem in Cancer Alley, something that's presently happening, and we see it and we know that it's there. Nobody, like, I hate to sound pessimistic, but like I don't have a lot of faith that people are gonna know what to do once the big thing have, like, you know what I mean? Like, and again, because it doesn't happen like that. Like now we know about Cancer Alley, but we're kind of desensitized to it.
Yeah.
Like nobody is like we're not actively putting pressure on the local government or the state government or the federal government to do something about it. Right? It's the people that are there, they're fighting, they're fighting for it. But those of us that are outside of it are not really doing a whole lot in terms of like we're gonna put a lot of pressure for this to be fixed. And I always tell people the best way you protect yourself is by protecting other people. So like me moving when I moved back to Baldwin County 2 years ago, and then I got involved over in Hancock County. Yes, it's because I care about other communities, but also it's because like whatever happens to them could easily happen to us. And so if we're not advocating for other people, if you're not actively advocating for other people, then whenever it gets to you, there's not one, you're not going to know how to advocate for yourself, but two, there's not going to be anybody left to advocate on your behalf. You know what I mean? And we've seen that throughout history so many times. So it's like people keep sitting back waiting on the big thing to happen. And it's like it's already happening. Like it's been happening. And the only reason we get to this point is because they've normalized it happening elsewhere. You know what I mean? So it's like there's only so much you're gonna be able to do elsewhere until it gets wherever you're at. You know?
Right.
So
I think Hollywood got us thinking it's gonna be some big apocalyptic uh the Terminator type shit. I'm serious. I'm dead ass serious because
that's how they want. That's how
they want.
Yeah, that's how they want. They want us to because they want us to think that way because it's like okay, if it doesn't happen in your generation, then it's like oh, cool. Like you almost like breathe a sigh of relief. But you don't put that sense of urgency in the next generation.
Right.
So now the next generation is not ready when things escalate, right? And then then it becomes normal to them. But the big crash still doesn't happen. So again, it's like sigh of relief. Like it's the same thing with like people talk about Trump. Like 2028 is gonna come. It's not gonna be some like big crazy thing that happens. But it's like think about the fact that like there's still National Guard marching around DC today. Like who's talking about that? Nobody. Right? So it's like that's already people already been desensitized to that quickly. And that just has started happening like last year.
Yeah.
Like everybody made a big fuss about it when it first started happening, but like they still there. They haven't left. You know what I mean?
No, they just keep giving it's so much. You know what I'm saying? Like our attention spans are only gonna go so far. You can only focus on, what you can focus on, especially what is happening to you in your vicinity. But that is by design. There's this author who wrote about shock culture, so that they plans to give you a series of events, one after the other, increase complexity and more unacceptable. But by the time that you're presented with the next one, you forget about the previous one. And they keep you in this loop, and that's exactly what the media does. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's even to the fact where it's like again back to my point about like generational urgency. I don't know if that's a little term, but it's not. I coined it. Like generational urgency. Generational urgency. But even think about like the way in which like I'll use Milledgeville and Baldwin County for example. Like when you go to like city council or like county commission meetings, like look at who's there. There's always like older crowd, right? So you don't. So we already see you're not. There's not a lot of 20, 30, even not really a whole lot of like 40-year-olds at those meetings, right? So the generational urgency already is not there. So by the time, let's say, Milledgeville gets to like a point of no return, it's gonna be too late. And because the people that should be there now, the 20, 30, and 40-year-olds are already not there. So what makes you think like the 20, 30, 40-year-olds of the next generation,
They're not there.
they're not gonna have the information
Right.
to be able to know where to show up, how to show up, like what to do,
Yeah.
how to organize around these issues. Right.
But my age groups, that they're the ones doing the most complaining on the book. And I'd be like, I'd be sending them my flyers. I'd be like, well, you gotta be present.
Yeah.
Your voices, you sitting here screaming into the ethers on the internet is not gonna cover what's happening in real life in real time.
Yeah.
So you got, but and I remember my homegirl when I think we were like late 20s, early 30s. Whenever she got her house, she started being like, hey, y'all be paying attention to what these folks doing, and we still young. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, girl, we don't care. You a homeowner. We're renting. Not thinking. Not thinking. And just as soon as we start paying attention, that's when shit started hitting the fan for real over the last decade.
Yeah. And that's why it's like when people be like, I always like, it's not funny, but I was kind of laughing when people were like, oh, when did the world get so bad? And they're like, it's like, you just wasn't paying attention. You just weren't paying attention. Like, it's been bad. It's like, the world is not getting any worse than it's ever been. You know what I mean? And I think
that's being filmed.
Not even that's being filmed. It's been filmed. Like, they were filming World War II. Like, they were filming the
but people look at how you had to view it, though. You could only, you had to go to a movie theater to see it. So everybody wasn't getting that.
People were seeing folks get hosed down and beat up in the street during the civil rights movement on their TV. So it's like, I don't even think, and I think, like, even this whole point of, like, oh, now he's been black. They filmed Rodney King getting beat up. And I think that film, that's a long, he was getting beat up for a long time. It was like that was a long tape. You know what I'm saying? Now, at best, you might get a little 3 minutes, if that. So it's like people been seeing what's going on. I don't think it changes with social media. That is like, and I always tell people, like, awareness does not equal action, and awareness does not really equal that people are gonna care. Right. Like people always say like we're a generation that has more information at our fingertips than ever, but like people also don't care. Yeah. Like
you got, what I mean, like in your hand at all times.
Like when people say I need a horse of water, but you can't make it drink. Like this is the perfect example of that. Like people have all the information, all the resources at their fingertips, and nobody cares. So it's one of those things where it's like, I also think people underestimate the just like lack of care that others have, and I think that's also why, like, when people like, I don't know, I just think the government is very comfortable knowing that people don't care. Like they know that, there's all this information in the world, and people don't care. You know, they're like, oh, they're burning books, they're banning this, they're da da da. You can still go and find it. They're like, oh, they taking seeds out of our. Baby, you can go buy seeds. Like nobody is, like it ain't that hard to get seeds. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I think people are making it's insidious, but I think people have this perception that it's like it's like some sort of like a proactive thing where it's really just like once they condition you to behave a certain way, things almost run on autopilot. Yeah. Once people are conditioned and they get your attention a certain way, they get you to only care about certain things. They're able to neglect certain communities and nobody does anything about it. It's like, they'll sell you 1,000,000 seeds. They know you ain't gonna plant them. You know what I'm saying? Like they'll let you read all the books and watch all the documentaries and hello, and be involved in all the things, and let you whatever, but they know you're not going to organize, right? So it's one of those things where it's like it doesn't just being aware about something, um, it's not gonna change how people move. And I think that's the part that really needs to be worked on. It's like you had generations that had less and were able to do more with less, and we're the generation that we have the most, and we just have to not know how to do anything with it. So I don't know. To me, that's the part that I look at, and the part that I struggle with is just understanding that fact and understanding that, like, I think people really don't have a clear understanding how things happen. So it's like it's not gonna be again, it's not gonna be like one big thing that happened and all of a sudden everybody's gonna be like, oh, something's changed. But it's like small changes over time gonna keep adding up. And then by the time you get to realizing that, like, oh, we don't have clean drinking water no more, it's like, what are you gonna do about it? It's tanks rolling down the street. There's people in jail. Like all these things. Like, what are you gonna do about it at that point? But so it's just you gotta get ahead of you gotta be able to get ahead of the curve. You gotta think 10 steps ahead, and people are not doing that. People are reactive. We talk about like reactionary versus revolutionary. Like that's part of reactionary politics. Like you only react to what's in front of you, not being able to see the bigger plan. Um, We'll initially get started. We're having a good conversation. Good conversation. So we'll go ahead and get started. As always, do y'all feel powerful today?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, all power to the people.
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 One more time, all power to the people.
All power to the people.
All right. So, thanks everyone for being here today. Today we're going to be talking about Black August through Blood in the Eye, which is a book, a collection of writings by George Jackson, but also highlighting what Black August is, the importance of it. And Vaughn is going to lead us in that with a presentation, but I wanted to sort of preface her presentation with a bit of context about why Black August is relevant to us as the new Vanguard. So, for those who are not familiar with the organization, the New Vanguard is an organization that I co-founded 2 years ago, and the work that we do is built on, I would say, very very heavily built on and inspired by the principles, the work, and sort of the framework of organizations like the Black Panther Party. And what we believe in is revolutionary politics. And the difference between revolutionary politics and maybe what you would call progressive politics or liberal politics is that we don't believe in the approach of reforming a system, but we believe that we need new systems. All right, we recognize that the current system that we have is not a system that is compatible with us being able to live dignified human lives. Is not compatible with us being able to sustainably take care of our environment. It's not a system that is compatible with everyone being able to have access to health, food, housing, having their needs met. And so we believe that we need new systems in place so that people are able to live life in the ways which we believe a dignified human life should be lived. And part of the reason why we believe that the system cannot be reformed is when you take a look at history, and as we talk about Black August today, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is political prisoners. Right? You talk about political prisoners, you have to be able to understand like the prison system, the prison industrial complex, what it was built for, how it came about to be, and you. The only way we're going to be able to understand that is through the history of slavery, but also how it came about to be through reform, how reform essentially created the prison industrial complex. Right. What you said, what? A legal way. Oh, right, a legal way. Um, so the system that we live under a system of capitalism, a system of white supremacy, of global imperialism, and at the start of what you would call the settler colonial project of the United States, this was an economy that was built upon enslaved labor. All right, so the people who founded this country, this settlement, um, went over to the continent of Africa, kidnapped people, brought them here to be enslaved, and that was the foundation of the not just the U.S. economy, but the new global economy of the Western world. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, a system that is based upon free labor, how does that system, when you emancipate your enslaved people, how does that system continue to survive? And that is through a process of reform. They have to reform this infrastructure that they have created, where you have free labor that creates wealth, and you have the people who run the system, who own the land, the resources, the industry, what we would call the capitalists, how they continue to build their wealth. And so they had to reform chattel slavery into essentially two systems. One, a system of low wage labor, right? So you think about sharecropping, and then the prison industrial complex, which started out as convict leasing. And so you have those things that come out of what is generally described as a positive, which is the emancipation of slavery. But then these people that are now emancipated are now put back into a system where they still have to essentially either sell their labor or be forced back into labor, right? So then, with the prison industrial complex particularly, you have to think about how does that system, that industry, that infrastructure, how do you supplement the labor and the human capital that it needs to survive? And so that's when you have to start to understand how laws and our justice system is sort of framed, and how it's structured uh, in this country. And one of the things that I think people may not understand is that incarceration is a fundamental function of our system. The system is created and built in a way that it creates criminals to feed the prison industrial complex, so that it's able to put those people to work. Some of you may know about like Angola prison down in Louisiana, which is a prison that is built on a what used to be a plantation, and the labor that they get from the incarcerated people directly services a lot of companies. They pick crops, they raise cattle. I mean, basically everything that they used in slave labor to do. Yeah, they're still in slavery, right? And so we have a system that is built to create criminals, and it creates criminals out of one, a formerly enslaved population, but also a population that is in poverty, right? So you got to think about, with capitalism, laws, a lot of what shapes the justice system in capitalism is what we call property rights. Where you have, property has more rights than people in this country. Um, we have a recent example of that in Baldwin County. uh, a man by the name of Calvin Brown had the police called on him for trespassing, and that led to an incident of police brutality. And when you think about it, that's the story of a lot of police brutality incidents in this country, where it's somebody being called because they stole, police being called because somebody stole or somebody trespassed, or you thought somebody was doing something that they wasn't. You know, um, Trayvon Martin case, he was in the wrong neighborhood. He didn't look like he belonged there. So you have a country that gives more protection to property than it does people, right? Because property is owned by a certain class of individuals who want to keep that property protected, but also the only way they maintain that property and that wealth is through this system that has been established. And so the system, creates its own criminals, but also it makes sure there are things that are established in the system to make sure that like rich people don't get locked up, right? So things like fines are purposely created. If you have enough money, you can pay your way out of not having to go to prison, right? If you have enough money, you can pay this fine and you have to get locked up. You think about how many people are locked up in jail right now simply because they couldn't afford bail, they couldn't pay a certain fine.
There's a judge should just see a DUI in that way. Like in Milledgeville. God, I see his face. I forgot his name, but yeah, they let him pay his fines, and he no probation.
Yeah,
But ain't nobody got it. Like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like,
that's what I'm saying. So you have, I mean, what was the guy's name who was locked up in New York? there was a documentary made about him.
Oh, okay.
Clean
Clean
Brother.
Yeah, Clean Brother.
Killed himself.
Yeah, and
And
yeah,
he was innocent the whole time. He stayed now like what, 3 years, right?
Yeah, Rikers for 3 years.
He
All
was
over,
innocent.
all over,
a child.
all
in
over a
Rockford.
fine that couldn't be paid. Right.
Yeah.
And
that-
so
But that comes back to property too.
exactly.
Yeah.
You don't have anything to put up on bond.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's just a vicious cycle
Right.
that
Mhm.
comes back to more like the property.
Exactly. And you think about it, even just like when like voting was first established in this country, you couldn't vote unless you owned property.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you had to be a property owner even just to be able to participate in the system, be able to have your voice heard. And so, there's something in the Black Panther parties in their 10-point program where they talk about uh wanting all black people who are incarcerated to be able to get a fair trial because they state that the incarceration of black people is inherently political, right? And the way in which you understand it is by understanding the way that the laws in this country are set up to continue to feed its incarcerated population. So even when you think about things like justice reform or whatever, it's like is a system that is so dependent on cheap and free labor, is that system going to be willing to give that up in the name of justice? Right. And like these are the questions that I think we really have to ask ourselves. And so, in a way, as the Black Panther Party framed it, most people, if not all people that are incarcerated, can be considered political prisoners. And so, but then you also think about, as somebody who you see this system, you come up in the system, you're a victim of this system, and you want to bring about change, right, in the system, and you see that this is a system that's not working. And when we talk about like political prisoners, for example, the United States is a country that likes to boast that it doesn't have political prisoners, right? And that's because they might not outright lock you up for your politics, but they'll find a way. They'll find a way to lock you up, right? So you may be somebody that expresses certain politics, for example, and you participate in a protest, and they'll lock you up for property damage or for inciting a riot, right? You said what?
Or scene.
Right, or right, lock you up for and even I think now they're getting back to a place where they're a little bit more open with what their true intentions are. But I don't think anybody who is a student of history or understands this country, I don't think is any surprise. But so they'll lock you up for inciting a riot as if you are the reason why people are rioting. When people are rioting because people are hungry, people are poor, people don't have resources, right? And um, so they create these situations and these instances um, of rebellion and people going up against the system, but finding other ways to lock them up to say, well, you're not being locked up for your politics. But that's really what it is, And so when we look at a lot of, political prisoners today, people who, especially, you have folks who participated in movements in the 60s, 70s, and 80s who are still locked up, been locked up for 40 plus years. Uh, when we talk about Black August and political prisoners, that's a lot of what this is centered around. And it's centered around also us having to recognize that if you are somebody who is aware enough and cares enough to want to do something, want to bring about change, that none of us are immune from, the system making us political prisoners. Right. There's no reason why they wouldn't come lock any of us up. If they felt like they had reason to, it just felt like it. Just felt like it. Just felt like, oh, we don't like what else they're talking about. We'll find a reason. Which I'm sure they could find. I'm sure if they wanted to, they could find a reason.
Yeah,
Right.
with their AI.
Right.
Heartbeat.
They'll find a reason. They say, oh, you owe $2 in back taxes. They're gonna lock you up. I mean, this is how they get people. This is how they get people when they don't want to outright lock them up for their political beliefs. Don't go looking through your record. Everybody has broken some law at some point, you know, and that just goes to show you how ridiculous the laws in this country are. So, so I wanted to, you know, just kind of give that background and context as we are having this conversation about Black August, about revolutionary politics, about political prisoners and what that means. You know, just to understand that incarceration is a function of the system. All of us can be political prisoners. You know, incarceration itself is a function of politics, and so you know, so that's something that we really have to internalize as we're having this conversation, because I think it then better guides us into when we're discussing solutions, changes, things that we want to see. Uh, you know, in terms of what kind of a society we want to create for ourselves and each other as well. So I will turn it over to Vaughn to lead us in the presentation.
All right. No, you good. Good to see the beaches, trying to say. All right. So I originally did this at for my church at the beginning of the month where we talked about revolution and sacred practices. I'm a very big believer in order to know where we are today and where we're going, we need to know where we came from. You know what I'm saying? You gotta know your ancestors, you gotta know your history, or you're gonna be doing to repeat it. Okay? So that's what this little 1-2 is gonna be all about. I'm gonna kind of skip around because I meant to reorder it, but so bear with me. Okay. So, Black August is not just a holiday or a celebration in a traditional sense. It is a month of remembrance, political education, discipline, and commitment to the ongoing struggle for Black liberation. The observance began in the late 1970s among incarcerated Black activists in California, particularly those associated with the Black Liberation Movement. They wanted to create a sacred period to honor the lives and sacrifices of those who had struggled and, in many cases, died for Black freedom. August was chosen because so many significant events connected to Black resistance occurred during this month. On August 7th, 1970, 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson attempted to free several incarcerated Black activists during a courthouse takeover in Marin County, California. He was killed during the attempt. Just over 1 year later, on August 21st, 1973, his brother, George Jackson, was killed by correctional officers at San Quentin State Prison. His death remains deeply significant within Black liberation history. These events, along with many other moments of Black resistance associated with August, inspired incarcerated organizers to dedicate the month to remembrance and reflection. Okay. But Black August was never intended to be only about remembering the past. It was created to ask, how do we prepare ourselves to continue the work of liberation? First, in remembrance. Okay. So these are going to be, a couple of points in how many have chosen to honor Black August. So, remembrance. We honor those whose sacrifices made our lives possible. Some are well known, like Harriet Tubman, Ella Baker, and George Jackson. Others are our own grandparents, neighborhood organizers, teachers, caregivers, and community elders whose names may never appear in history books. Black August reminds us that our history is carried not only by famous people, but also by everyday people who refuse to give up. Second practice is political education, like how we're sitting amongst each other talking now. Many observers dedicate August to reading books by Black authors, studying liberation movements, learning about local history, and discussing the ideas that shape struggles for justice. Political education isn't about memorizing facts, but about understanding how history influences the present so we can make informed choices about the future. Third practice is discipline. Some people fast during Black August. Others reduce distractions, exercise regularly, spend time in prayer or meditation, or commit to daily studies. The form of discipline varies from person to person. The common thread is intentionality by choosing habits that strengthen the body, sharpen the mind, and deepen one's sense of purpose. Finally, there is service. Many communities observe Black August by feeding neighbors, mentoring young people, supporting mutual aid efforts, contributing to organizations that assist incarcerated people and their families, writing letters to incarcerated individuals, or volunteering. These acts reflect the belief that liberation is not only something we talk about, it is something we practice together. At its core, Black August invites us to slow down and ask ourselves, what kind of ancestor am I becoming? Okay. Now, I got a couple of revolutionaries we remember just to name a few because it's an extensive list. But first we're going to talk about George Jackson. George Jackson was more than a political prisoner. He was a scholar, a writer, and a revolutionary thinker. While incarcerated, he transformed himself through reading and political study, eventually authoring Soledad Brother and Blood in My Eye. His writings challenged people to examine racism, capitalism, prisons, and the conditions that produce violence. For Jackson, political education was an act of liberation. He believed that understanding history and systems of oppression was essential to changing them. Even while confined, he insisted that no prison could fully imprison a liberated mind. Jonathan Jackson, his little brother, was only 17 years old when he became involved in an attempt to free imprisoned Black activists from a California courthouse in 1970. He lost his life during that effort, and his death became one of the events that shaped the observance of Black August. Jonathan's story reflects the intensity of commitment felt by many young people during a period marked by racial injustice, political repression, and demands for liberation. His story reminds us that many young people throughout history have believed they had a responsibility to act, not simply observe. Huey P. Newton. Now, y'all know Huey helped found the Black Panther Party in 1966. While many other while many people remember the party for its armed patrol, Newton emphasized survival programs. So the Black Panther Party had all the programs. They had a medical clinic. They were feeding the children. They political education. You know what I'm saying? Want to make sure that the people were prepared. They would walk around with the law books in their hand because they just never knew when somebody might stop them. Um, Fred Hampton, he was the leader of the Chicago Black Panther Party. He believed that lasting change required bringing people together across racial and economic divides, an approach that became known through the Rainbow Coalition. Now, this was one thing I did not know about Fred Hampton myself, that, he got the different colors together, you know what I'm saying? He made sure that everybody knew that, listen, we're one. They don't like our black bloods. They don't like y'all neither. They don't like the poor. They want to keep certain people under their thumb and disenfranchise. And it don't just be about black people. Now that was something that I just grew into because I never really believed that white people could be oppressed. And then I started, becoming more educated about how this system is really out to get everybody, unless you got a couple of hundred million trillions in the bank, right? Asada Shakur, her autobiography remains one of the most influential memoirs of the Black liberation movement. Through her own words, she reflects on her childhood, political awakening, experiences with the criminal legal system, and her understanding of freedom throughout her writing. She returns to the importance of community care, collective responsibility, and refusing to surrender one's humanity even under immense pressure. And we read that book last year. Or no, when did we read that? That's one of our, yeah. What book was that? Asasha Shakur's autobiography. That was one of the first we read, yeah. Last year. Yep. And of course that was my first time reading it. And I was just I shed a lot of tears just especially the period of her the Jersey Turnpike and everything after that. Cause this black woman went through a lot. She gave birth. She had to give birth in prison, and they already didn't care about a black woman, but a pregnant black woman is treated her even worse. So to remain woman, you know what I'm saying, to not become hardened by the system and still able to give birth. That was an amazing thing. But she reminds us that liberation is not only about resisting injustice, it is also about imagining and building a world where people can truly live with dignity. As we reflect on these lives, we begin to see that revolution wears many faces. Sometimes it carries a book, sometimes it carries a ballot, sometimes it carries breakfast for a hungry child, sometimes it carries a microphone, a lesson plan, or an organizing strategy. Each of these revolutionaries leaves us with the same question: what does my love for my people require of me today? The end. Thank you.
That was very, very beautifully written.
Right.
Anybody want to give some feedback, some thoughts on that beautiful presentation? Anything that makes y'all think about? What did that bring to mind?
I like that last quote. But just it kind of goes with the awareness doesn't equal action, right? Because it's like you gotta be aware as well as care at the same time. And when if you was to think what my love, my people, why I hate you, you gotta be aware of what's happening, and you gotta care about it.
Right, Hampton, on what you were saying about doing and bringing people together. You kind of remind me of Fred. What I would think he would be like, and because the importance of like finding that common cause that people can get around and move forward. Because of course we all have differences and everything, but like you said, there's always someone that's going to try to manipulate us and use us to their advantage. And if we could just get people educated to understand that we can all work together to push back against that, I mean, we'd be in a much different place. And, I think as I have evolved as a person. Um, just, as I put all the pieces together now, I think about me going to like GMC and the friends I had then, and the southern friends I had then. I mean, valuing myself, my background as a black woman, and valuing like, you know, I guess black people. It kind of I was sharing with Rika that I was dating this Mexican lady when I lived in California, and it was her that like embraced and loved black people so much that I was like, okay, this is kind of weird because I need to have more black friends than I have, and how can you hold black people in such high regard? Whereas I'm like I don't know. I didn't see it in that way as far as like even dating the people that are dating and stuff. So it's kind of like once you realize or you take the blinders off and come out of the bubble, you realize that you yourself have these thoughts of anti-blackness. You don't have to be another race to be anti-black. You get indoctrinated into these things, and I just think that someone like Fred Hampton was so young, and to have realized the power of bringing people together and valuing himself and his community and people, I think that's like amazing. So,
Yeah,
thank you for
yeah,
that.
yeah. And to kind of build off your point is, there's a question I saw one time that said, do you love black people more than you hate white people? And I think that we have a lot of people who are rightfully angry, in terms of what they have experienced within the system of racism and white supremacy. And I think, when it comes to, and I think that's what sets the reactionary and the revolutionary apart. The reactionary is somebody who is going to be angered. They're going to be, ready to react at every instance. And there's a quote from Kwame Ture that says, people who talk. Sometimes people talk about revolution and they always talk about destroying, but they don't talk about building. And revolution is about building, right? So when you have to think about that question, what are you willing to do, for your people, and also think about, do you love black people more than you hate white people? If you are approaching changing this system from the position of, I hate this and I hate that and I hate that, all you're going to be thinking about is how to destroy, but you're not thinking at the same time how to build. And I always tell people that, as they say, all empires fall eventually, right? So it's not a question of if, but of when. But it's also is that, like, knowing that all empires fall, my focus is not going to be on destroying as much as it is going to be on building, because the question is about, to me, is about what comes after the empire fall. But what, who survives, and what infrastructure is in place to make sure that we don't rebuild something that was just as bad or worse as what was just before that. And so I think that when you shift your focus from that sort of reactionary mindset of what you hate to understanding what it is that you love, then you start thinking about building, right? And so that's why, you know, I built a community garden, because I realized that I want to serve people more than it is that I want to be confrontational. Right? Confrontation is necessary. It's going to be a necessary part of the process. But let's make sure that we have something built for the people that really need it. Because me doing a bunch of confrontation ain't feeding nobody. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's not. So it's that we have to be focused on building the things that are going to sustain people, so that we can do the work that needs to be done. And that all, there's a quote in the book that says, like, all revolution has to be grounded in love, right? That George Jackson says that in the book. And so that really puts into perspective, when you're talking about calling yourself a revolutionary or whatever the case may be, what is that grounded in? What are your actions grounded in, and the way in which you approach these things? And so I think that was very beautifully stated in the presentation.
Yeah, if it wasn't, I think if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have had a outlet to channel my positivity.
Mm.
Like that question you just asked, do I love black people more than I hate white people? At one point, no, I didn't. My hate for the oppressor was like overpowering. I didn't care. I wasn't thinking like, okay, so what do I do with it? Because I cannot beat up and I can't cuss out every white racist white person. But what I can do is build. And so yeah, I think everybody has to get to that. Get to that point. And if you don't have community, and if you ain't got nobody else saying, okay, this is a great way to do this, I'm not a self starter. So I was so happy to meet you. You know what I'm saying? Like they gave me a channel, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I was there at one point too. Like I was, and luckily for me, I think that the privilege and luck that I had was starting very young. Like I read, I remember first time I really read like revolutionary literature. I was like 15 or 16, and yeah, of course, like you're gonna be mad. It's like somebody just waking you up violently from sleep. It's like, but at the same time, I think that also, and I give a lot of credit to the book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, because I think also Malcolm X's own transformation throughout his life also helped guide me through that process. He also started off as somebody that was very, like, angry and very confrontational, and I think at one point you could say, he definitely hated white people more than he loved black people. But I think once he stepped away from that and was willing to evolve past that point, is when he was able to really become, I think, the Malcolm X that I appreciate. I think that there's sort of like two Malcolm X's, and there's the Malcolm X before he leaves the Nation of Islam, and then Malcolm X after he gets out Nation of Islam. And I think that Malcolm X, when he gets out of the Nation of Islam, is when you can really appreciate how much he loves his people, because that's when he really starts to talk more about building, and he starts doing a lot more building. He's traveling to Africa and connecting with revolutionaries in Africa. He creates the Organization of Afro American Unity, he's doing all these things that are towards building and really trying to figure out how does he build for his people. Um, and that's when also his perspective on racial relations, change as well. And so and I think that like sometimes people can think you're trying to like a lot of times when people are talking about, for example, the Rainbow Coalition with Fred Hampton, they think he's trying to do some like kumbaya thing with everybody. Where to your point, it's more so that we have to recognize, what the multiple roots of this problem is, and one of them is a class struggle. So whether you're black, white, Asian, Mexican, whatever the case may be, if you are a poor person in this country, we have more in common, and than we want to than we may not than than what we may want to recognize. And so it's like, am I gonna allow myself to be so blinded by you know whatever anger it is that's fueling me that I can't be in solidarity with another poor person, right? And um and I think sometimes people don't realize that that's what it takes to be able to bring people along, the journey. I remember like when when I first came back, Raymond at the barber shop, he asked me a question. He was like, he was like, so, are white people allowed to be a part of your movement? And I was like, yeah. I was like, my thing is not about, like keeping white people out or hating white people. I'm always going to
Everybody can
prioritize.
enjoy that.
You said what?
Everybody can enjoy that.
All right, like and it's like my purpose. Of course, I put black people first,
Yeah.
right? Like I put black people at the forefront, even within this organization. Like we read very black literature. We study, black revolutionaries. We a lot of our work is grounded in the work of black liberation. But we have black people, white people, like we have all, it's not to say, just black people in the organization. Um, and so, but it's the fact that we recognize what ties all of this together. And so, so that was kind of my answer to him is like, this is a black first, it's grounded in blackness.
Yeah.
But I recognize that other people can care as much about black liberation as I do. To like shout out Liam, for example, like Liam wrote a whole essay on the Republic of New Africa, which is a movement that is grounded in black nationalism. And he was asked to present this to like formerly incarcerated political prisoners who are part of that movement, right? So, and like he was kind of like, you know, like he at the time kind of felt a bit inadequate, but I'm like, they ask you to present this because they can see that you care about this. They can see that you appreciate, this movement, and that to be able to write about it in such a way that people read it and said, "Can you present this at this thing?" So it's we have to be able to, those are the kinds of things that I think really push us forward. And yeah, so just to build on the point that you all were making as well. Anybody else?
I think the expectation is for us to be reactive. That's what they expect us to do. And if enough of us are reactive, we're not going to make any changes. And so, for us to move outside of that paradigm and shift against that is will put us in a better situation. And that's not what the expectation is. They're so used to like being angry, being upset, and not taking any action. Yeah. And so that doesn't do anything but fuel it, make it better for them, and it just makes it worse for us.
Right.
And so to take action, like, what is it? Be about something. Be about change or something. Don't just talk about it. Do it.
Yeah.
And so the call to action is always there. We can always complain. There's always more that we can be doing at all times.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, and that reminds me of something that again Kwame Ture said, where it was talking about like movements, the difference between like a movement and organized, organized thing. And I think a lot of times people take moments to be movements, and then they take movement to mean that this is an actual like organized thing when it's not, right? Like we can go out in the street and protest today. That doesn't mean we started a movement. That doesn't mean we're not in protest, right? But if after the fact we don't come together and organize for something more, then that was just it was a cool moment. We had our voices, made our voices heard, or whatever the case may be, but then nothing else. And so a lot of people sometimes they're just looking for that release, they just want to release that, so they'll go out. Yeah, they'll go out and release that, and then you go back home and nothing changes. We haven't organized, we haven't created anything. So that's very important distinction as well. Um, and so I want to continue this conversation by using Blood in My Eye, which Juan mentioned is a book, a collection of George Jackson's writings. And George Jackson, I think, was also the reading his work was also the first time I really was able to understand what to do with my anger, but also like the knowledge that like I was reading a lot of books, and then it got to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm doing a lot of reading, but like, where do I go from here? Like I understand a lot, but like, what do I do with it? Beyond just having this knowledge in my head. And I think that George Jackson's writing, I think, puts it very plainly. He speaks from a point of building, and he gives you a really good understanding and a really good grasp of the system and how the system works, from for the purposes of how you should build in opposition to it. And he talks about different things. He talks about fascism in this book in a way that I can really appreciate, because I think that especially now, white America particularly, it's like, oh, the Trump administration is fascist, which it is, but so was every administration before it. Langston Hughes wrote way back in, when World War II was happening, he wrote a poem that essentially said that, like, what people are calling fascism in Europe is this the good old American. This is what America always has been. And a lot of people don't even acknowledge the fact that what was happening in Europe with Nazi Germany and other fascist governments were directly inspired by the United States. They said this stuff. You can look at the companies that were supporting the Nazis in World War II, like Ford and other companies, where these were American-based companies as well. So I think that George Jackson really does a great way of sort of providing that context and that framework in this book that allowed me to be able to kind of come to that point as well. So basically, I'll kind of be going through the book. I'll read some highlights, some quotes from the book, and we'll discuss kind of what that brings to mind for you, in the current context of things, as well. And feel free if that makes you think about anything that's currently going on, any questions you want to ask to the group. Let's have those conversations. So the first couple of quotes I want to pull are from the preface. So this first one says, "In prison, commitment to revolution has a special meaning and a special price. To be identified as a revolutionary by the prison authorities means an almost permanent denial of parole, separation from the other prisoners, solitary confinement, usually in maximum security wings of the prison, transfers from one prison to another, beatings, bad food. It brings down on you the entire punitive and repressive forces of a completely totalitarian system." And so the reason I wanted to start with that quote is because, again, Black August is heavily centered around political prisoners. And thinking about, I think a lot of people, especially today, don't think about the prison system on the inside of it as a frontier for organization and a frontier for, the fight for, against the system. There's a lot of history behind, prison uprisings. I think one of the most more famous ones being like the Attica uprising, for example. So there's a long history of people organizing behind bars, but also people who are organizing on the outside, being in prison, and having to, deal with that, what that comes with when once they're incarcerated. And so I thought that was a really good quote to start with, just to again contextualize everything in terms of Black August, political prisons, so forth and so on. But yeah, so what does that quote bring to mind for everyone else? What do you think about that?
Well, first that whatever we do, where the FBI shows up at somebody's door because of a Facebook post,
Mm-hmm.
because they are the face of an organization, in and how sophisticated the system has become. Which makes it more dangerous, basically. But that makes the work still more necessary.
Absolutely. Anybody want to share or build off what she said?
Like that she said, it makes the work more necessary. Does it also make organizing inside the prison just as important as organizing outside of prison? I'm pretty sure it's a lot you can do inside of it as well as you do like.
Mm, I can add to that. Well, I haven't worked the big system in about, so about 10 years. However, what you see out here with literacy issues amongst our young people is really bad in the prison system too. They don't want to. They first of all, the prisons started taking out, and this was when did I kind of work at state 2009, 2010. I was at Hancock State Prison, and the inmates started coming and being like, "Did you know they're removing certain books out of the?" Because I was reading, and they was like, "Yeah, they won't let us have this book, that book," and I was just like, "Well, if you guys been here learning, you'll figure out how to overpower it." And, you know what I'm saying? And the inmate will keep it real. They be like, "Mississippi, we already know we outnumber y'all, but we just don't, we don't want to start a riot." But anyway, at any given time, it's not a.
It's a lack of leadership and desire to grow while in that situation. Most of them just want to get 5 day to day. They're not thinking about the expansion of their minds and how when they get out, life gotta go on, and you're either gonna learn from your mistake or you're gonna consider this and be better.
So I think not only do they have to get to organizing, but you just gotta. I don't know. The morale is down. Um, because when I first started the prison system in 2006, you had a lot of older men. Like we're talking one. I didn't. I would call him the cat person because he kept escaping the prison. Like every 5 or 6 years, he was figuring out how to get over that pit. However, he had been locked up for like 30 some years. But he finally got to an age where he was like, I'm just too old to try to get life. So now I'm just trying to sit down. And if I had known then what I know now, I would have did nothing and jumped the fence. Cause he could have been out by now. You know what I'm saying? They gave him more time. However, he said now I really just be trying to get the younger ones to see to you know he was kind of on his George Jackson thing, but and me, um, being that this was my early 30s, I wasn't thinking like this anyway. But a lot of the times, the inmates would spark something in me because now I tell people like, why you don't go back to the prison? Because I'm gonna hit the button that's freedom guy. You don't want me. You don't want me behind the wall now. Like if I'd have stayed in the prison system, this year would have been 20 years for me. So 20 years ago, which means I was 2021 was very naive as to how the system goes. But 41-year-old me, yes, they think niggas crazy. Right. You know what I'm saying? That's my mentality now. And but y'all, the officers, I don't know where I was going. I'm gonna land this plane. You need the right mindset, not only in the with the inmates, but you also need officers and people who aren't so institutionalized, and that is just not the case.
But I mean, we know they're not. That's not what they're. They're not gonna make
Yeah, they're not
anybody an
gonna make it.
officer. And it's kind of just like the way I to tie both the points together. The way that I look at the prison is like it's basically a reflection of what also happens outside of the prison, right? Like we also have to understand that like you know, in the prison you have the inmates, and you have the wardens. On the outside, you have us, and you have the police, right? And the difference between the people on the inside, people on the outside, is that we just haven't been locked up, but we're policed in the same way, and it's the same mindset where people are just getting by day to day and not really thinking about, these things that we're talking about today because of just how heavily burdened they are with, whether it's the amount of jobs they have to work, just surviving, or whatever the case may be, and also I think that like to the point of I think organizing like Juwan said in the prison system. I think that also comes with getting people on the outside to destigmatize incarcerated people. Because I think that because of the stigma that people who've been incarcerated have, people making certain assumptions about them, it doesn't really allow for us to be innovative in how we can help them to organize inside. And just not even necessarily from people who already think like us, but just in general. When we were at a recent city council meeting and somebody was making a presentation about they wanted to essentially start a halfway house to help people coming out of incarceration reintegrate into society. One of the first things that city council members started asking is, well, what if they are, what if they're sex offenders? What if they're this, that, and the third? Are you gonna tell the community that you're? And it's like, why is that the first place your mind went? Because if you really look at it, sex offenders don't get locked up at that high of a rate. Like they're not out here. People who are out here really committing transgressions against human beings are not being incarcerated, right? Right, they can be president, but a lot of them are not getting incarcerated, right? And I mean, you look at the fact that like a lot of people who are victims of like these kinds of crimes don't even trust the system enough to go report it because they know that the perpetrators are not going to be incarcerated. So, but it's this kind of mentality. This is what they kind of like socialize people to think about people that are incarcerated is that, oh, you must be in there for the worst of the worst, and it literally could be somebody that didn't have money to pay a fine. It could be somebody that got locked up for some weed. Like like when you look at a lot of the people, there's a lot of people. A good number of people are incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. So it's like, but they make people think about folks these ways so that we don't really invest a lot into incarcerated people. Right? We don't see them as victims of the system. We see ourselves as victims of them or as potential victims of them. Right? So when you have somebody coming along say, I want to do something for incarcerated people, oh, I want to help. What if they're this? What if they're that? It's like we haven't even begun to know who our audience is, and you're already making these assumptions about them, right? And so that's I think part of the work you have to do is like destigmatize incarceration and to what I was saying earlier, get people to understand that incarceration is a political function of the system. Right? So people like you said, people will be incarcerated for whatever the system feels like locking you up for. They'll find a reason if they really want you to prison. And and I think one of the things that they do to us on the outside is that they get us comfortable enough to police ourselves and to police each other, right? So that way they're not having to do a lot of the work either, right? So we already have to heavily police ourselves because of the fear that we have of incarceration as well. And I think that if people had less of a stigma around incarcerated individuals, things could really change. When it comes to um, helping them be organized, but also organizing on their behalf. Also, like I remember one time, there's a current political prisoner by the name of Shaka Shakur that we've been a part of some of the work for his freedom campaign or whatever, and a lot of times, like when you have people who are campaigning for political prisoners, it might be, a situation where it's like they were locked up for allegedly shooting at a police officer, shooting a police officer, killing a police officer. Asada Shakur was tried for the same reason and incarcerated for the same reason. And and sometimes people will be like, well, did they do it? I'm like, it honestly doesn't matter whether they did it or not. Like to me, I'm just gonna be honest. Like to me, it really doesn't matter whether they did it or not. Even if they did, like the terms of their incarceration is doesn't make sense, right? And then also you look at the context within which it allegedly happened. Like, am I mad that Assange Court probably shot a police officer? No, probably not. You know what I'm saying? Especially knowing the context of the times, like they probably, if anything, they probably shot at her first, and she shot back in return, whatever the case may be. So it's like I'm not here trying to like, um, it's like people almost like these people had to earn their humanity before you can advocate.
They
for them.
do.
And it's like I'm not doing that with you. You know what I'm saying? Like these people are human, regardless. Like so I think that ties a lot to it. I think just like we really have to work on destigmatizing that, and that's not to say that there's people who haven't committed acts that are terrible, but again, we live in a system that cares more about property than it does people. So it's like, is this a system that I trust to make those judgments? No. I think there's better ways to do that. And that's what, we're also advocating for.
And it's funny you said something about predators. It made me think about that white couple that had the daycare. I haven't even thought about them since that. When did that happen? Like April or earlier this year. Because one of my coworkers' kids was was a little girl at the daycare, but I ain't even thought about it no more. And so now I'm like, oh, what's gonna happen with that? Because these were affluent old white people. And so I appreciate you guys for that.
Can you give me the background on that?
So there's a old couple that owned an in-home daycare system. The old man was charged with child endangerment, molestation, and all that stuff. And I was just saying how desensitized we are about predators, but the first thing they asking is when we're saying how to deal and get them back into the system. Well, what if they're a predator? And what if they are? Them be your people. Gather them. Do what you need to do with your people. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I believe that they should just, be able to freely roam? No. No, I don't. But they still gotta live. And they still have to be a productive member in society. So what do you do? You know?
And I think my point to that even was just like, I was just questioning the fact that like as a city council member, why was that first place your mind went when somebody is saying that they're trying to build a facility that's going to help like people that are coming out of incarceration reintegrate into society? Your first thought was, well, do you have a way to like? And it's like to me, it's like there's also and sort of what they explained at the city council meeting was that the people that they're receiving, they're partnered with agencies that are gonna do like the screening, and like these people are already there's already a screening process before they even get to the point of getting a bed at that transitional facility. So it's like there's already a whole process in place with the Department of corrections and whatever those the few other departments that they name. So there's the whole process in place already, and institutions that are responsible for that screening. So like this is not the point at which you can ask these questions. Go talk to the Department of Corrections if you want those answers, right? Because that's who they're getting these folks from. And so for me it was just like I was just trying to I really didn't understand that line of reasoning, but to me it also just showed again how stigmatized incarceration is when that was the first place your mind went, not understanding that like most people are not incarcerated for those kind, for
Those
violent
people,
offenses, for violent offenses in the first place.
Yeah,
Everybody's
petty crimes and property crimes.
right. So for me, that just showed a really that showed a lot of ignorance around incarceration and who typically is incarcerated and for what, you know. So yeah.
And you have to think about the political consequences because
Yes.
the prison system is used to incarcerate people and it decreases who can vote. So it affects how people can participate in the so-called democracy.
Right.
And it also forces them into the lack of options after that and the stigma. So it's not innocent at any point.
Right. Exactly.
Point. When you were reading that and take back what you both were saying, I was thinking about the military and like how if you push back against the system or if you stand up against someone of higher authority, then you kind of like have a target on your back. And then if anybody's associated with you, that if they have a target on their back, and like one time I was accused of causing a coup. Like within the unit, I mean that's a big deal. And
Nice.
a coup like upright, like hitting everybody together against
January 6th. What they did. No, something like
What they attempt?
So the supervisor we had, he was like being a tyrant, and he was like harassing people. He would like the people that he liked, he would hold them in high regard, and talk about their work and everything. And then the people that were not like aligning with what he wanted them to do, he like call them out and say that they were weak or something like this. And so this one person was like pushing back against him. I was like, no, that's right. We should, say something to his commander and everything. And so everybody kind of got together, wrote something, their account of it, and we gave it to like his supervisor. And then it was just, luckily they investigated it, and we didn't get in trouble for that. Doing that in the military is like a no-no. But I think that it's important right now for these young folks that are in the military because of our commander in chief right now, who sometimes I can say on account of giving unlawful orders or doing unlawful things within the government. So if these folks are not educated on what is right or wrong and in alignment with, you don't have to follow an unlawful order. Like, when you're in the military, you think, okay, yes sir, yes ma'am, whatever. But that's not how it is. Similar to like in the prison system and out here, you gotta stand up for what's right. But there are consequences that come along with that. It's scary.
Yeah. And I was gonna say you said the military is frowned upon to say you could, but that's exactly what we mean about like how much freedom do you really have? You know what I'm saying? My my daughter had joked. At least we turned it into a joke that she wanted to go to the military a few years ago, and I said I promise you I'll shoot you on your feet toe before I let you go. It's a lifetime line for a country that will not let you exist freely. Yeah, it really is not made any sense. Yeah, yeah. It feels like we beat the dead horse.
It does. So kind of moving along, there's another quote that I want to quote from here. Two quotes that I want to tie together, but I think kind of tie to the conversation we were having before we started. So he says here, he quotes basically a line that people say when they say, "Ain't nobody but black folks gonna die in a revolution." He says this argument completely overlooks the fact that we always have done most of the dying and do dying at the state through social neglect or in U.S. foreign wars. And then further down, he says, I think it is vitally important to stress that for black folks, a concern for the survival of the race is not patently not definable as racism. So that first quote to me is important because we're just having the conversation we're having earlier. As he says here, people have always been dying through social neglect, through wars. Um, and I think that sometimes when you talk about being in resistance against the system. Like there's some people, I've been seeing people saying recently when they're saying, oh, the government is doing all this because they want us to go out and riot so that they can impose martial law and kill us. And I'm like, what are they doing differently now that they haven't done before? And at what point did we ever stop rioting? Like almost every summer since the death of Trayvon Martin, and probably before that, but this is just as much as I can remember. Almost every summer since that year, people have been out in the streets protesting something. You know what I mean? So it's like, to me, it's like it's almost to his point, like people are making this argument that they trying to do this so they can kill us. It's like, well, they're gonna kill you anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
One, they're gonna kill you anyway, but two, it's like that's a mindset that you have because people are actively protesting right now.
Right.
Like people are protesting ICE, people are protesting police brutality, people are protesting the government. Like there are people who are not as scared as you are that are going out and doing the thing that you're saying they want us to do so they can kill us, right? Um, and then there's another book we read. It's really an essay called Pacifism as Pathology, which also frames that argument in the sense of like, people are, you're scared to go out and protest because you could lose your life, but think about how many lives you could save in the process. Right? Like if I go out and protest for something, whether it's against ICE or against police brutality, or whether it's for better healthcare, whatever the case may be, is like if that movement is successful, think about how many lives are saved in that process, rather than my fear of, oh, if I go out here I might die. So I'm saving, the only life I'm saving in that moment is mine, right? As well, and again, like he says, like people are actively dying whether you protest or not. So it's really just about like, are you more afraid of the dying that's gonna happen for things to get better, or you're okay with the dying that's currently going on? Things never get better, and then things never get better, and more people keep on dying, right? And it's like it's really like going to war. Like, yeah, going to war, people are going to die in war. But sometimes when you go to war, you go to war for a good reason, and it's to stop more death from coming in the future, right? So like, think about how many people will continue dying if Nazi Germany was never stopped, right? And so I think that's a really important way to frame this, because I think a lot of times people like are so afraid of the loss of their own life, that they don't see that loss of life has already been happening so much, that this is what necessitates us to have to go out here and do what it is that we're saying we need to do. And anybody want to answer that, or anything that you know about?
I mean, aside from like protesting, like what's another way to be proactive in individual?
I would say like what we're doing right now, and I think that like also what people have to, I think also what people have to realize is that with protests, for example, like protest is just one expression. It's usually like people are frustrated enough with something to go out in the streets and protest, right? But as we said earlier, the real work really starts when people organize. So it's the work, is the things that are being done that you're not gonna see. Like you'll see the protest, but you're not gonna see. They're not gonna put on TV. Oh, these folks over here building a community garden, or these people are over here advocating for better healthcare systems, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of things that can be done. It's just I think don't people don't prioritize organization enough. People like, I think it's sort of like, this part of human nature where it's like you kind of have to see something happening for you to feel like it's happening, right? And that was kind of like the whole thing with the civil rights movement. It's like the civil rights movement didn't come out of nowhere. Like them people in the streets didn't come out of nowhere. These were people who were organized prior to hitting the streets. And I think that's the part of the equation that we're missing today, is that people don't organize what's going on in the streets. They go out in the streets and then they go home and nothing else ever happens. So, when Dr. King, led those protests and he started them, when the Montgomery bus boycott started, that came from, that was something that was organized and strategized beforehand. And then they had other things in place that were going to be done. So it was hitting the streets, but also after they were done hitting the streets, it was going back to the churches or to whoever's house to sit down and strategize and what's the next thing we're doing. You know, and so it's really about, it's not necessarily the protesting that I think people need to be concerned about participating in, but it's really about finding out what like organized initiatives are going on in your community or around it that you can be a part of, because that's what's really going to bring the change. Like, the Civil Rights Act wasn't passed because people went out to the street to protest. Like, it was a part of it, but a lot of it was more so the other things that were happening behind the scenes that people were organizing. So that's what I would say is really being more like the proactive part is being a part of an organized ecosystem. The protest is just something that happens, as people wanting to like show their frustration or their disagreement with, the current state of affairs. But it's really nothing more than that at the end of the day. So
I think I struggle a lot with protests because, like you said,
anybody can get out there and say anything, but what's the end game?
Right.
We just going out here and telling people we meant to help. And so, I just think um back then when we were organized, we organized in a manner that made sense and we kept it to ourselves. And I think too many times we talk too much and take too little action. And sometimes we need to organize quietly and just move. Everybody don't need to know. Only people that need to know is people that are going to take action and down for the cause. And I think right now there's so much going on that we can't seem to get ourselves organized. And we're so concerned about people that don't want to get on board. We need to work with the ones that do want to get on board and figure out how we can collectively move together. Can't get everybody, and that's we don't want to sell out to everybody because everybody ain't cool. But I think it's we just gotta move quiet, and I think back then they that's what they did. And also what your time and money was the feeling behind that organizing and the movement and thank God King of the difference between a movement and a movement is sacrifice. So, what do you sacrifice in the name of the movement? And that goes back to what she was saying about what it looks like to be a revolutionary interest. You give up everything. Yeah. You like it's just like of everything and stand in that space of solidarity. Sometimes it's by yourself, standing up with nobody supporting you, but standing for the cause.
I like what you bring up about sacrifice. And I'm gonna take it towards white college students that's all around all that. And sacrifice is such a big issue with them. Like if you look up Georgia College ICE protests, you'll get a million articles. Hundreds of people. This was last January. Those same people, you tell them, okay, this is the time to go out to the garden. This is the time our monthly events are. Like these are the time all the food banks in Milledgeville need volunteers, and not a single one of them is there because they're not willing to sacrifice their Saturday. They're not willing to sacrifice their evenings after school. And so, but if you are like, okay, we're gonna do a protest, they're out there immediately. They're out there and they're loud. They're out there and they're like up in the front, and then they go home and they go to bed, and that's it. They don't want to organize, but they want to feel good about themselves. They want to feel like they're involved. They want to feel like they're on this moral pedestal almost.
Yeah.
But they're not willing to actually sacrifice anything. If you schedule a protest during the time that they have class, they'll be out there. They're already there.
Excuses.
They're already on campus because they have their class. But then if you tell them like we're gonna be at the garden for 2 hours, 120 minutes, not it.
Yeah. And I think that that resonates deeply with me because for me, like moving back to Milledgeville, Bone County was an act of sacrifice. And I won't go into everything that I had to sacrifice in the process, but it's really like you know it's not only what you see us doing, like we're doing something at any day of the week, like there's something we're involved in. And, like for me, there isn't like a weekend. You know what I mean? Like people like, oh, like, what you doing this weekend? Something I do every weekend. If I'm not doing a community event, I'm at the garden or I'm preparing for something or, now we get asked to come up to Atlanta and present to organizations in Atlanta. So it's like, I'm always doing the work. And this is what I came back to. This is what I came back for. Right. So there isn't because I don't get a lot of leisurely time, but this is something that is love inspired. Like it comes out of the deep love that I have for this community, so I don't mind it. And I've made peace with those sacrifices. People ask, why would you come back to Nashville? Why would you come back to Fulton County? It's like that shows me that they don't understand the level of sacrifice that it takes to really care, to deeply care about your community. Because anybody can say that they care, and like she said, like, you know, feel good about themselves, but to actually carry out the act of sacrifice, to do the thing that is required it's not that I want to do this, but this is what is going to be required for things to change. You know, I recently put up a video on our TikTok just talking about like, what is it that's gonna have to change about our community so that our young people can stay here. And I got a lot of good comments, but also I got a lot of comments from people that was like, yeah, I just had to leave. Like, there's nothing there. Ain't nothing ever gonna get better. It's too late. And it's like, I understand where you're coming from, but I can't understand having that mindset and feeling like you care about your community. You know what I mean? Um, because when it comes to places like Milledgeville, there's always gonna be somebody left behind. Everybody can afford to pick up and go. Everybody can't afford to leave. So it's like if Harriet Tubman only cared about her own freedom, there would be no Underground Railroad. There would be no, all these enslaved people, her coming back and freeing these people, right? And I think that in a certain way we would understand that, right? Like, oh, once you get out, you just want to get away from it. You want to maintain your own freedom. But somebody caring enough about their people to say, I'm gonna go back into and risking possibly being captured back into enslavement to free my people is like that's a level of sacrifice that like I can't say that I care about my people and not want to act and make the kind of sacrifices that she made. Right? Like it's you cannot honor those like what Vaughn was saying earlier, like what kind of ancestor are you going to be? It's like I can't honor somebody like Harriet Tubman and not want to have that level of sacrifice and care for my community. And I think that that's something that like nobody gets to see the sacrifices that have to be made every day for the garden to keep going or these events to keep happening, whatever the case may be. Um, and and we don't do it for that reason. But it's when the changes come about, those are things that people are gonna get to see, and those are the fruits of the labor that people will get to enjoy. And you know, we would just hope that along the way, people will come on board and be a part of the process. Because the more people we have be a part of the process, the bigger of an impact we can make as well. But yeah, she's absolutely right. It's like to what both of y'all are saying, the level of sacrifice is something that like people just don't have the motivation, for it's people want to be seen, they want you to know that they care, right? And it's like, yeah, I care about this. I'll put on a Black Lives Matter shirt or whatever the case may be, but you haven't done anything for us to feel like we really care about about Black lives. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, so it just kind of gets to that point for me, when it comes to really like figuring out who really cares is to both what both of y'all was saying. It's not just about who shows up protest, but who do I see on the ground every day in the community really like trying to make that change. Anything else anyone wants to add to that? So moving on, there's another quote that I really like from George Jackson here, and he says, "The task of a revolutionary is to make revolution," and that's something that stood out to me when I first read this book because you kind of have to like really internalize what it is that he's saying, right? Revolution isn't something that happens spontaneously. Like people don't just like one day wake up and decide that they're gonna carry out a revolution or an act, some revolutionary act or whatever the case may be. But revolution is something that is organized and is planned and is strategized, and the infrastructure for revolution has to exist for a revolution to be able to happen, and for it to be able to be successful as well. And so, when he says the task of the revolutionary is to make revolution, essentially saying that, your work is to create the conditions under which people can be able to engage in revolution, and that is what the job of revolutionary is. And that is, educating people, but also meeting their needs and bringing people into a space in which they can be able to grow, you know, in revolutionary consciousness as well. Uh, anything that brings to mind for anybody or anything y'all want to discuss about that?
Well, I think this is tied to what you mentioned at the beginning, that you cannot just be angry and confrontational, because once we start doing the work, sometimes that's what other people need to start doing the work to see what comes next. To be able to join, maybe I don't have the imagination to come up with the strategy, but I have the passion and I have the will to participate and to do something about it. And I think that's also part of what we need to continue to do. I think that some people might think that Milledgeville wouldn't be the place for an organization like ours. And we're happy to see that every month we see new people coming to see what's going on. So I think that's a good step in that direction.
I think that goes back to what Vaughn was saying. Not necessarily self starter. I think that prevents people from going. Because I don't want to go because they're going to expect a lot out of me. I just want to support the call.
Yeah.
And I think the expectation or the onus on the people to come and lay foundation is stronger than what it really is. Just your presence alone plays a role in just you being there and talking to other people about it.
Exactly.
You don't need all cheese. You need Indian and cheese. So, to get it started. And it's a combination of both. Some people have the idea, some know how to execute.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to kind of build on that, I think the reason a lot of people also feel that coming into this kind of a space or doing this kind of thing is like there's gonna be a lot expected out of them is that I think a lot of people don't understand, and I guess for me one thing, the way I try to look at it is when I'm doing this work, I'm actively creating for myself the kind of life I believe that we all should be able to live. So I don't see it as me taking on like an added responsibility because I don't have any intentions of continuing to live a life that I feel is compatible with where my principles and my morals are. Right. So a lot of people come to this space, I think, expecting that, um, and I think what it's probably generally been for a lot of people is that you may, join an organization or try to support a cause, and you're taking on a lot of responsibility, but you don't feel what the like relief is that you're supposed to get from this thing, right? So like if I'm saying that we're creating a movement to um, address food insecurity, I also have to believe that nobody that is a part of this movement should also be struggling to eat, right? So if you're already struggling and you come into the movement and you're taking on responsibility, but you don't feel any sort of relief in your own personal life, then that movement has failed you. Right. And so for me, it's like we have to create movements that are taking things off of people's plates so that they have more capacity to contribute. And I think that is a something that falls on those of us who call ourselves organizers or part of organizations, is that we're not doing the work of showing people uh, what it is they should look forward to. Right. So we're asking a lot out of them without putting anything back into them as well. And I think that that's something that in terms of moving forward, uh, that a lot of organizations have to take into account because people are stretched very thin, and so you can't expect more out of them than they have to give. And if they already don't have a lot to give, then they're going to be intimidated to come into these kinds of spaces, right? And so that's something I think about as well.
I think you have to empower them, to speak up for your own cause. You're going to get a lot of people that want to support those people, but they don't have those shared experiences. So someone that has food insecurity coming out to support, and I don't know where my next meal is coming from. It can be challenging at times. So to know that, you know, I think some people expect the reward to come immediately. And I'm not going to do it because I can't see what the outcome's going to be, or it's a process. It's a marathon, not a. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so it's hard to change the mindset of someone that's actually experiencing the impact with.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I like what you mentioned about getting something from this organizing because I think that not everything is going to manifest in the material. I think that nowadays a lot of us have probably tried to find the answers through therapy and things like that.
Yeah.
And that has a limit. At some point, you realize that it's not something that has to be fixed on yourself, but it's fixed when you understand the material conditions that are making you feel a certain way. So I think that that must not be ignored in how we organize because every time we gather and we understand what's going on, it provides answers for how they feel. And that's part of the work of revolution. You have to understand that there are some things that you need to get rid of in order to achieve the goals.
Yeah.
Such as the heavy feeling. Like for example, I remember when the war in Gaza started, I went to a video practice easily. And I came to the realization that I just couldn't, tell my therapist, I just hate everything that's going on in the world, right? And they were not providing answers for that because the answer is always wasn't on yourself. No, we need to work on the world, on the conditions that are creating these feelings, on the actors that are creating these feelings.
Yeah, and I forget who said it. I want to say it's in this book. It might not be, but there's a quote that says, people don't die for ideas. They're dying for real life conditions to change. And a quote that is in this book, he says, building consciousness and revolutionary culture against the repressive natural defense reflexes of the system means taking realistic day-to-day issues like hunger, the need for clothing, housing, joblessness, and so where I'm sort of coming from with that point is, I do, and I think that, part of the work is getting people to understand that everything is not going to be fixed immediately, but also at the same time, like, people are not going to join your organization, especially people that are really dealing with these issues are not going to join your organization simply because they believe in your ideas. People want to see material changes happen, right? People want to see that something like what is gonna get better in my life or in my neighborhood or in my community, And I think that, like, that's part of the frustration that, like, we see in a lot of people who are part of, like, for example, the Democratic Party's constituency. A lot of the problems that they're having now with their party is, I've been voting Democrat all my life and things are just getting worse, even when Democrats were in power, right? And so I think that people are starting to realize that, like voting for an idea or getting behind an idea is not enough. Like, material changes need to happen. And again, to the point I was making earlier, it's like, you know, um, and a quote that he also has in here, he talks about how, like, revolution, long-term revolution doesn't matter to the person who could die tomorrow, right? So it's like, while I do understand that this is a long, drawn-out process, I can't make this relevant to somebody who is dealing with a situation that could possibly mean life or death. If I can't eat today and I could die tomorrow, what do I care about your revolution that's going to change the world in 20 years?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So that's why I think that for me, like, the act of building is so important because it's like, we're not going to be able to change the world today, but there are things that we can't do right now, infrastructure that we can build right now that can help somebody survive the day and make them be able to show up tomorrow. And to me, that's the important part. If I can help you continue to show up, because I know that I need you as much as you need me, then I'm gonna do whatever it is I can to make sure you keep showing up. So if I gotta grow you some squash so that you can eat and feed your kids so they can show up tomorrow, then I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna work my hardest to grow you that squash. Whatever it means, that's what I'm willing to do because that's how I understand that people experience the world, right? And And that's just a lot of, I think, a lot of where a lot of people's frustrations come from, with whether it's political parties or organizations or whatever. It's like you want people to believe in an idea that they haven't seen you materialize anything for. They haven't seen you produce something that they can touch and experience. And so it's like, we're getting to the point where it's like, at one point in time, people were willing to die for ideas because those ideas were new, and those ideas were ideas that they believed would change the world. But 20, 30 years down the line, people already died for that, and nothing has changed. Why is me dying gonna like do something new? Or you know what I'm saying? So that is and again, let's go back to Kwame Ture, because he's just somebody that I that has helped me really like fortify this mentality. But it was like, it's not enough to ask people to die. It's not enough to say you're willing to die for the people, but are you willing to live for the people? Right. And so we have to also not just give people something to die for, but something to live for. Because most people are they ready to die already. They're depressed. They have nothing to live for. So asking you to die is not that much of an ask in that scenario. When they asked Malcolm X, is he afraid to die? He said, I've been living like a man who's been ready to die for 20 years. Right? So it's like, can I give you something worth living for? Because I know you probably ready to die. You ready to crash out. If I ask you to go pick up a gun and go crash out right now, you probably do it. Right? But can I give you something to live for? And I think that's the more important question. And that's why, for me, a lot of the work that I do is I ground it in trying to give people whatever it is that they need to keep them going, so that they can continue to show up and we can build this thing together. Uh, Anything anybody want to add to that? Nothing?
I think that something that keeps rolling over in my mind is faith without works is dead. Like, I have all the faith in a movement, but if I'm not actively doing the work, putting boots on the ground, hand in the soil, then the movement is dead. It's not gonna, uh, bear fruit. So, and I think that that's like when you mentioned how people were dying 30 and 40 years ago for an idea, that 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 looks like how the faith um did not meet the word,
Mm.
because we're still, trying to think we shall overcome. When we thought in 1964 we overcame.
And overcoming ain't happened yet.
It ain't happened yet, but it's just a reminder that that being in this is work that requires work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely. Alright. So another quote he has here, just to kind of speak to our organization, is he talks about what the role of a Vanguard organization is. And he says here, I'm not implying that the Vanguard Party act out the people's role. I'm not implying a society superior to society. We must never forget that it is the people who change circumstances, that the educator himself needs educating. Going amongst the people, learning from the people, and serving the people is really stating that we must find out exactly what the people need and organize them around these needs. And that's a really important quote as well, because I think that a lot of times when people think about um, organizing or leadership, uh, people believe that you have to lead from a position of having all the answers. And I think a lot of times, at least what I've known to be the truth, is most leaders don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
But people expect them to have the answers because they have either assigned them a leadership position, or you have somebody that cared enough to start doing something and everybody just started following you like a leader. But a lot of times, I think that the more important part is, the leadership typically are the people that maybe have the most ambition or the most courage to find out what the solution is going to be. But part of that work is being amongst your people and really on a day-to-day basis, figuring out what those needs are and how the solutions you're coming up with are going to address those needs. And so, with our organization, again, I moved back 2 years ago, even though I went to middle school, high school, college in Milledgeville and Baldwin County, I was away for between 2020, I moved back in 2024. So I was away for 4 years, and a lot of things can change in 4 years, right? So I'm not expecting that the community I left is the same community I'm coming back to. So one of the things that I did when I moved back is I started going to every and any community meeting, collaborative meeting, wherever people was meeting at and talking about what was going on in the community, I was there. And just reacquainting myself with the community, but also getting a good feel of like what has changed. Um, Liam and I we used to we go to the barbershop every Friday evening and just go sit in the barbershop and talk to people in the barbershop, whoever was there. And just getting a good feel for the community, like what's going on, what are the things that, you know, people are frustrated about, what are the things that need to change. Just getting a good pulse on that because that is what is going to inform whatever solutions it is that we present to people to say this is how these things can change, rather than just me coming back from Richmond, Virginia, and saying, "Oh, this is what we're doing in Richmond. We need to try to do this in Milledgeville," and not taking into account that this may not be compatible with what's going on in Milledgeville or where people are at in Milledgeville, right? People may not be as far along, in this work as the folks that I encountered in Richmond, Virginia. Um, so I think for our organization, that's a really important aspect, and that's part of the reason why we do have like these community conversations and things like that, and we go to county commissioner meetings and city council meetings, is not just to hear what our government is doing because a lot of times they're not doing a whole lot, but to hear what the people are saying when they show up to give public comment or bring up an issue, and it might be something going on that we were not aware about, and now that's something that we can come back amongst ourselves and say this is something we need to start looking into and talking to people about as well. And that's the way that I view this work that we're doing. And you know, uh, I don't really like to call myself a leader, but people tell me I am. So that that is what I like to. Uh, that's how I like to approach leadership as well. Anything anybody wants to add to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of organizations that want to cookie cutter curriculum and ideals or visions that they have that they want to impart upon communities or people. But I think, like you're saying, or I've experienced other organizations that hear the concerns of the people and have these type of gatherings and then develop something to meet those needs. I think that's probably the ones that have the best outcomes, and see success from. And then you also building like trust and community and moving forward.
And what I want to close out with, I know it's almost 4 o'clock, so we'll close out with this one. There's a chapter or a section of a chapter in this book titled Autonomous Infrastructure. And he says here, we'll start from the beginning to build our own infrastructure in every possible area, people's stores, hospitals, banks, buses, army. This dual power, this building of political infrastructure and the military is succinctly stated by the Minister of Defense of the Black Panther Party, UPUN, who says, "We recognize that in order to bring the people to the level of consciousness where it exceeds the time, it would be necessary to serve their interests in survival by developing programs which would help them meet their daily needs." And so Huey then goes on to talk about the survival programs as Vaughn was mentioning earlier. But I think that this idea of autonomous infrastructure is a really important one because take, for example, the fact that the transit system was just terminated in Baldwin County due to the county's mismanagement of funds. Um, I think we're seeing in our everyday lives, even before this, that um, again, we live in a system under which our government does not have the dependable infrastructure and social services that will help to uh, provide for people's needs. And I think that we do have the responsibility as tax paying individuals to hold our government to account as to what it's doing with our money and these services that they have told us, told people that it would provide. But I think also we also I think have to heavily consider the fact that we also have to begin to provide for ourselves, and that there is um, there is a responsibility after you know numerous decades of having a government that is not dependable, to begin to understand that the people, if they want to be able to survive, have to begin to depend on themselves. And what I really appreciate about the Black Panther Party, and where I take a lot of my sort of direction from, as Bob mentioned, it's not that they had on berets and cool leather jackets and was carrying guns, but it's that they really were building infrastructure, uh, beyond just the one that people know, like the free breakfast programs or whatever the case may be. But they did have buses. They had a school. They had programs for senior citizens in the community. They had a bail program where they were, bailing people out of jail. They had legal services. They had a clinic. They used to do sickle cell testing for Black communities. And so again, we're talking about, and that was, what was the actual, the guns weren't the threat, necessarily. It was the fact that they were building this infrastructure where they were doing the job of showing people that your government, with all these billions and billions of dollars that you're paying taxes, can't even provide you with the basic infrastructure, and we're doing it with much much less than they have. So it just goes to show people how little it takes to actually be able to take care of your community, And I think that that's something that, again, going back to some of the earlier discussions we were having, that people have to be able to see, that we have to be able to show people that it really doesn't take that much, to be able to do for your community. And then that gets people to questioning, well, what is the government actually doing with my money? All this tax money we paying, you know, um, all this money that the county's supposed to have. What were y'all doing with it that we don't have anything in the reserves to sustain a transit system that our elders were depending on? You know, so I think things like that are really important, and I think when it comes down to everything that we think about um during Black August and this conversation, I think it really just, it really comes down to that, comes down to the people coming together to do for ourselves and really build the kind of world that we want to see, because as long as we continue to depend on the system, it's going to be hard to, one, be in opposition to it, but to also pull away from it. Right. So that's that's sort of the thing that we have to think about and moving forward. Anybody want to add to that as we close out?
I got a quote. This is from one of my social media people that I'm following, but she was just talking about the ongoing fight for the people, and so she said, "Our greatest fear as Black people has never been a misunderstanding of our power. It is the fear of what the inadequate will do when they know we are powerful." That's why I'd be happy that Fidel's always open with, all power to the people. Because if we truly knew as a collective how much more powerful we were than any entity that seeks to steal, kill, destroy us, we could really make the change. So just a reminder that you do, each every last one of us have all the power.
Yeah. Because ultimately, we're the ones working in their factories. We're the ones, toting the guns in their militaries. We're the, all of the labor and the foot soldiering that they need for this system to be able to continue. They're not, those rich folks are not out there carrying guns. So they're not out there going to war. They're taking 4 kids out of 4 communities, putting them in their militaries. So like you said, once the people realize that, you know, if we decide to stop, this whole system stops.
Mm-hmm. That's why they keep us fighting each other. That's why they keep all the isms on racism, sexism, all of it. Because even amongst us, um, yeah, we're gonna get it out. Like I said every time, this gives me faith because, like I said, I needed a avenue to channel this positivity. So it's just me. You were asking, what to do beyond. Continue to come around us. Start volunteering to you out there in the garden and just anything that you feel like your community needs outside of anything we're doing. Do it. Be the one to affect the change that you're looking for.
And we also recently we have a group chat. So if you want to stay up to date with what we're doing, our activities, participate, if you want to join the group chat, definitely see me and I will get you added. But anybody else have anything to add? Well, thank you all, as always, for participating in great conversations, and hopefully, uh, you this has given you a lot to reflect on and to think about, not just in regards to the sacrifices that have been made in the past, but the sacrifices that will need to be made today and in the future for us to be able to create the world that we believe we deserve. And so, with that, we'll close out as we always do. All power to the people.
All power to the people.
All right. Thank you all very much. Please feel free to take some of the literature